Hi there, dear YouTubers. Welcome to Real Turkey channel, and this is your presenter Atilla Yeşilada. Today I want to talk about Turkish politics and in particular about these rumors of early elections. Even though our president Mr. Erdogan and the parliament are not due for re-election until 2023, suddenly over the last 15 days, early election articles, comments on that has proliferated. There are at least 10 that I read today. Why would people be thinking that Turkey might be heading for snap elections or early elections? One of them, obviously, is the economic reason. Turkey's currency reserves are very low. The Turkish lira started depreciating again. And I, as well as a strong minority of Turkish and international economists, think Turkey must sign up to an IMF standby program to get over its currency bottleneck. Otherwise, in a few months, Turkey will suffer a balance of payments crisis or a currency crisis, as it's colloquially called. And Mr. Erdogan may not want that, or he may wish to renew the mandate from the people before facing IMF to get better conditions for the standby loan. As you know, there are always prior conditions to be fulfilled, and the stronger the presidency and his parliamentary majority are, the better are his chances to dilute these prior conditions. Politically, we have had some very interesting provocations. Suddenly, more than a dozen mosques in Izmir, an Aegean city, started playing Ciao. Obviously, these mosques have a centralized loudspeaker system for the 5 times daily prayer, and the government accused the opposition of hacking into the system to denigrate the Muslim voters or the Muslim people of Turkey. It appears that the frequencies were open. They were not deciphered, so anybody could hack. Even though CHP said it had nothing to do with this incident, several members of the CHP Izmir organization are currently under arrest for one reason or other. Secondly, Mr. Erdogan says there will be no elections before the scheduled time, but at the same time, he urged the organizations to go out, shake hands with the people, kiss baby. Well, not kiss babies anymore. We still have social restrictions, but wave to babies. Oh, how cute you are! You're such a darling. And to regain the hearts of the voters, which is kind of interesting. If you are not going to have elections, why to mobilize your rank and file, your grassroots organizations now? After all, you want them to have peak energy and mobility right before the elections, not right now. Finally, AKP and MHP proposed a new legislation which would prevent members of the parliament to switch parties. Why? Because no one knows. Because right now, no members of the parliament are switching parties. No one has resigned his party, etc., etc. Several rumors by former members of MHP and AKP surfaced in the press alleging that maybe 50, 60 AKP deputies are about to migrate to the new two parties founded by ex-lieutenants of Mr. Erdogan, namely the DEVA party of Mr. Ali Babacan, former economy czar. Yeah, right now they are spraying against COVID-19. I'm sorry, I really can't do anything about the background noise except to go out and sort those people out, which I won't do. Just a second. Let me shut the window. This is such an intimate broadcast where you see my daily life as well as I deal with the gardeners. Uh, uh, and indeed, the rhetoric by Mr. Ali Babajan and Mr. Davutoğlu, former prime minister who founded the Future Party, are receiving a receptive audience, not only by the people, but by intellectuals of Turkey as well, who are traditionally left-wing. Mr. Babajan's most noteworthy comments of late were that the day he and his party comes to power, he will guarantee full freedom of expression to everyone and immediately release all journalists and prisoners of conscience or political prisoners in Turkish prisons. Mr. Davutoğlu is constantly harassing Mr. Erdogan about his links to Gülenist organization and why he had allowed the Gülenist organization to fester so long in the armed forces. So many people think that, this new legislation not to allow members of the parliament to switch parties is to bar DEVA and Future Party from a snap election. Because to qualify to contest the elections, there are two rules. Either you have a caucus in the parliament, that is 25 deputies right now, or 20. B, you have to be organized in at least 2/3 of the 81 provinces of Turkey. I don't think either of the two new parties have fulfilled that obligation yet. So if you pass this legislation, if they can't form a caucus by transfers from other parties, and they haven't finished their national organization, therefore there would be disqualified. Obviously, that's a theory. AKP and MHP deny that. They think it's against political ethics for parliamentarians to switch parties, insinuating that usually there are bribes involved. Now, what do I think about early elections? I think Mr. Erdogan doesn't plan early elections. I think his strategy is to reinvigorate the economy very quickly over the summer months, generate enough export revenue, gain the confidence of global banks and financial investors to draw in new loans and financial capital to get over the currency bottleneck, and increases popularity by escalating growth to 4 or 5% per annum next year. In fact, his economy czar and son-in-law, Mr. Berat Albayrak, came out today guaranteeing Turkish people that there will be positive growth this year and that none of the state fixed investments will be stopped. He said the stock exchange is doing okay, the budget is doing okay, we have weathered this crisis much better than many other nations. So, is this strategy going to work? Probably not, simply because the COVID-19 outbreak in Turkey is not completely under control. The Ministry of Health is still reporting more than 1,000 cases a day. And the new case divided by tests administered ratio is roughly 4%, which means if the ministry had administered 100,000 tests, we could easily see 4,000 new cases, which would require locking up the economy again. And talking to medical authorities, as well as listening to their comments on the media and reading them in the press, I understand, as everywhere else, there are hundreds of thousands of asymptomatic cases. That's patients which show no symptoms whatsoever. And as economic, travel, and social restrictions are eased gradually over the summer months, there could be a second wave. There would be probably clusters of cases. Already there are two such clusters, one in the southern province of Gaziantep at the border of Syria, two in the province of Van at the border of Iran, I believe. Yeah, Iran and Armenia. So such clusters, and then in autumn and winter, a full onslaught of the virus, which would require lockdowns again. That would be devastating to Mr. Erdogan. And I think this is a very likely theory. Secondly, there is no way investors or banks would return to Turkey given the fact that the anti-Western rhetoric continues and regulations change every day to make it extremely unpredictable to do business in Turkey. In fact, today Reuters published a special analysis claiming that some of the foreign banks in Turkey are ready to pull out, and other small and medium-sized banks are looking for buyers simply because banking business in Turkey is no longer profitable. Essentially, all banks are ordered to make loans whether the credit risks warrant it or not. Finally, we know from international evidence that at least 40% of the jobs lost during the outbreak do not return. That's because even though all the restrictions are lifted, people still comply with social distancing measures, and their consumption patterns have changed, perhaps permanently. They spend more time and consume more at home and less in movie theaters, concerts, restaurants, and vacations. Of course, we're also losing most of the tourism season, and our exports are not going to increase this year, not because of our problems, but because, as Lagarde, the chairwoman of ECB, stated yesterday, the European economy is going to shrink somewhere from 7 to 11%. And with 50% of our exports going to EU, the outlook is rather grim. To add to that, we know from the recent surveys of the business world that propensity to invest, that's new capex, that's building new factories or updating equipment, is simply not there. So really there is no way to grow. And I think Mr. Erdogan would only resort to early elections if and when he comprehends that there is no way he could steer the economy to a high growth path. And that will probably happen sometime around August or so. So yes, I do expect snap elections in Turkey in the fourth quarter of the year. Probably September, October are the best times. I've prepared some graphs here to show what currently the chances of Mr. Erdogan and AKP are. Here we are, and why am I not being able to show this? Here we go. No, wait, okay, here I go. I have to go here. Okay, so this is just a second. I religiously collect all polls which are published officially, that is, which are branded polls, not rumors of polls. This is the average of polls conducted since February, and it represents a fairly good sample of center-right as well as left-wing pollsters. If you look at the AKP votes, it is 38% and MHP 10%, 10.3%. So already, if elections were to be held tomorrow, AKP plus MHP would not have a majority. Their total would be slightly less than 50%. More important is this column GP is Mr. Davutoğlu's party. It's pulling 1.5%, and DP, DEVA Partisi, is by Mr. Babacan. It's also pulling 1.9%. This may seem like very small percentages to you, but combined they're at 3.4%, and assuming they act in unison with the opposition bloc, they would make a huge difference. But in my view, distributing undecideds according to the share of the parties in raw data doesn't reflect the full truth, because the undecideds may not be distributed along a bell curve. This is why I have prepared this. So let's go to that one. This is the same polls, but this time with undecideds shown separately and not added to the votes of the parties. Now look at this. 16.5% on average are still undecided. And AKP's raw vote drops to 33%, with MHP declining to 8.5%. If you sum this up, you would see that they'll need to get more than half the undecideds to garner a majority and for Mr. Erdogan to be reelected. I don't think that's a possibility, simply because the April polls have been conducted over the telephone, not face-to-face, and given Turks' fear of talking to strange people on the phone, it is quite reasonable that a lot of opposition voters, that's CHP, E Party, HDP, SP, etc., said we're undecided, or we're not going to vote. We're not going to vote. So I can reason that a good, more than a fair share of these undecideds would go to the opposition parties. Two, I believe the true undecideds are not undecided between AKP and, say, the center-left main opposition party, CHP, but between AKP and Davutoğlu and Babacan parties. Simply because this is politics 101. It applies to every country. Each party, or a strong charismatic leader like Erdogan, has two types of followers. One, diehards, like Trump's people. I mean, they don't care what Trump does, what people say about Trump, they're going to vote for Trump. And that's about, for Erdogan, this is about 20% of the national vote. The rest of the AKP and Erdogan votes are there either for ideological reasons, that's advancing the cause of Islam, or for the fact that Mr. Erdogan delivered constant prosperity over his reign. Now, neither of these are true. AKP is not truly an Islamist party, in the sense that if you look at Mr. Erdogan's cabinet, the pro-AKP media and the functionaries, they really have nothing to do with Islamism. They are Erdoganists, coming from different ideological backgrounds and only working with Erdogan because Erdogan grants them favors. And prosperity, let me show you whether Erdogan manages to get prosperity. Now, this is a Turkish poll. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to translate this into English. This poll is conducted by ANAR, A-N-A-R, which previously used to do paid work for AKP. Recently, they have parted ways, But even when it worked for AKP, Anar did decent work. Obviously, no pollster is perfect in its forecasting record, but I could find no evidence whatsoever that Anar was biasing its results to favor AKP. The poll asks the question: we know coronavirus is currently your biggest concern. Apart from that, what is your biggest concern? And the answers are the economy. 77% of the participants in this poll said we're concerned about our economic condition and the economic condition of the country. In this table, you see the breakdown of the specific complaints. 50% of the participants said they have lost income despite state aid. And 14.9% said they've lost their jobs. I am claiming that this 14% would find it very difficult to get their jobs back because social restrictions and social awareness would dampen down demand for restaurants, for services. Therefore, the people who have lower incomes would continue to range around 40% in the second half of the year, which means they can't consume as much as they used to. And therefore, the Turkish economy cannot grow. The second column here, horizontal column, are the participants who said, I am more indebted now. And that's 36%. Now, that's a big concern. Even if everyone gets its pre-COVID-19 income back, more of it would go to paying interest and principal on these debts. So there would be involuntary savings and less room to consume. This too suggests to me that the economy will not grow. And here, that's really sad. 14.9% said they had to close their stores, shops, or businesses. These are probably just small retail shops, shops in shopping centers, little kiosks that sell food on the street, etc., etc. And we know from studies in the United States as well as other countries that after a 3-month shutdown, the prospects for these businesses to reopen are close to zero, which means that they won't be employing new people. And if they can't employ new people, there won't be no new disposable income to spend. Trying to make 2 points here. A, even if all restrictions are eased, according to the results of this poll, and there was another Girişim poll which reveals pretty much similar results, it would be very difficult in the economy to go to status quo ex ante, that is, to the situation before the crisis. 2, Mr. Erdogan has failed his nation in terms of compensating them for income losses during the COVID outbreak. And here it is, 50% said, my income declined. That's half the participants, and if the sample is truly random, half the nation is suffering from inadequate income. This is why I think Mr. Erdogan doesn't want elections right now. He wants to reinvigorate the economy and change these figures to regain the hearts of voters. Then he will stay in power. But if he can't do that, and I bet that he won't, then his option is to use the central bank, which can print as much money as it wants to, simply because that's the tradition in the world now. No one asks any questions to a central banker about the amount of money it prints. Then this money will be borrowed by state banks and by the treasury via issuance of government bonds. and we would see a pork barreling unprecedented in Turkish politics. Essentially, every identifiable constituency would get something, hoping they would vote for AKP, and Mr. Erdogan would shoot for another 5 years. This strategy, whether it could be successful, my viewpoint is it won't, because it will lead to currency crises or massive inflation, but it's too early to talk about. What really matters is that no early elections within the next few months, but at the end of the summer, if the outbreak still lasts and the economy is still in doldrums, yes, Turkey will face another elections this year, which means no matter who wins, because of the pre-election uncertainty, we have lost 2020 in economic terms. Thank you very much. This has been a studio broadcast of Real Turkey Channel YouTube channel by Attila Yeşilada. I hope that the sound and visual quality has improved, even though there is no hope for content. And I hope you will share our videos if you like the content. Bye bye from Istanbul.